And again, the desensitization comes in part because it's just people are used to it, because that's what NATO does, because that's what the West does. And again, it goes back to that dehumanization, that we are led to believe that these people who are being targeted, whose hospitals are being targeted, are somehow less human. And so it's easier for people to accept that and not empathize with these folks. Some of it is, though, maybe a defense mechanism. I mean, if you fully emotionally grasp what was happening now in Gaza, it would be a painful, painful thing to live through day after day, which many of us are living through. I mean, many of us are in great pain to see this, to see hospitals being destroyed, to see every university there being destroyed, some of them through very methodical, planned, controlled demolitions, right? Not just through bombing. I mentioned in the book, one of the universities, they actually very slowly set dynamite to and just blew it up. This is a hateful, hateful thing that is happening. Christian churches destroyed, mosques destroyed. And that's another thing. I mentioned the Christian churches. You know, you mentioned how we dehumanize Muslims, which is true, but also part of what we do is deny that there's Palestinian Christians, because that is not a fact that is convenient to the story. Of course, Jesus Christ was a Palestinian, which is also not discussed, because, of course, that hits very close to home when you have Palestinian Christians being wiped out. And they are. In Gaza, I think at the time that the war began, there were only 1,000 Palestinian Christians left there because of the terrible conditions that had been inflicted upon Gaza. Most of the Christians had left. And there's this kind of, again, to the extent that they admit there's Palestinian Christians, they trying to claim that it was Hamas that persecuted those Christians, which is totally untrue, absolutely untrue. It's the Israelis that have persecuted those Christians. And again, that's an inconvenient fact. But yeah, the desensitization is a huge issue. And, you know, just as an honorable mention, we should say there's people around the world that are being murdered right now in places that are not discussed, like the Congo, that the West is involved in. And we just absolutely those people are invisible to us entirely, even more than the Palestinians are. So there's a lot of dehumanization to go around and desensitization that we have to fight against.
You have something to say, John?
Yeah, well, just to kind of highlight that point, I think you mentioned the concept of the golden billion, and I think that is very prescient, because really Western human rights, that is as far as the notion of human rights extends, right? And that's what we're seeing unfold. So, right, it isn't just necessarily directed against Islam, but it's all of these different forces that are outside of that golden billion that has been basically protected and coddled by the notion of Western human rights, but that it doesn't extend to the other 7 billion people on planet Earth. And we're seeing those contradictions come into focus and be so undeniable now because of the different forms of media and the fact that we're getting to see this unfold in real time. It just exposes the contradictions for what they are. And I like that you highlighted that concept of the golden billion.
Thank you. Yeah, and I comes down to that, you know, the 7 billion people or so in the world that are forgotten, dehumanized, live in countries that the West is exploiting, just on an incredible scale, right? To mine minerals and get cheap labor. And that's all those people are to us, is cheap labor, right? For the most part. And again, the only way to live with ourselves is to deny their humanity, right? Because when you have to put your head around the fact that there are children who are mining our minerals so we can have our cell phones, the reality of that is terrible. It's absolutely unacceptable. But we accept it somehow. And as you say, it's human rights for those in the global north who are doing the exploiting. That's this, those are the people that are cared about. But we are moving away from that, as you say. That is something to take some heart in. These protests on behalf of Gaza in the West are something that I don't want to say are totally new. I mean, in the West, there's been a great history and of protest on behalf of, as you say, the kind of the forgotten 7 billion. There was obviously huge protests during the Vietnam War. There were huge protests in the run-up to the Iraq War. But these are the first real significant protests on behalf of the Palestinian people. And to see people running around with keffiyehs around their necks, it's a beautiful thing. And the Palestinians see that. I mean, even in Gaza, right, you're seeing people with tents that say, "Thank you, university students." So there is an awakening that's happening, and that we should be thankful about. And the more people awaken to the suffering of people in the global South, the more that it will be hard, the more difficult it will be to just exploit those people and kill those people with frankly just reckless abandon, as has been happening.
Absolutely. That's one of the things our buddy Libre, who's in Gaza, told us, is that he hears the Palestinians talking all the time. Like, did you hear the Americans are protesting, or did you hear, the Americans are actually fighting back? So it's awesome to see. And hopefully that just, continues and grows exponentially as more people become educated and figure out what's going on. It's easy to fall for imperialist propaganda when the media is beating the war drums, right? And a lot of people are like anti-imperialist in hindsight. Like they'll support the intervention when the media and the politicians are telling them to support it, but then 10 years later they're like, "Oh yeah, that was based on lies." But you talk about one of the most effective lies in U.S. history in your book, in the Naira testimony. About these babies who were being taken out of incubators and left on the floor to die. And you compare that to the beheaded babies story that we heard recently about Hamas on October 7th, allegedly beheading babies. And of course, there's been no evidence for this, but I would say a large portion of Americans still believe it to this day because the media pushed it so hard when it came out. So can you talk about that a little bit and the parallels between those two stories?
Yeah, no, it is an interesting, thing to compare those two. So in the run-up to the first Gulf War in 1990-91, there was this story that when the Iraqis invaded Kuwait, that some of the Iraqi soldiers went to this hospital and they saw babies in incubators and threw them on the floor, killing them. And this was a big story that helped. This is, obvious war propaganda now, but at the time, it was viewed as a truth, and this helped pave the way for consent for the war against Iraq. Now, of course, that did turn out. I think by now everyone has admitted that was just a lie. That wasn't true. But as I mentioned in the book. And then there's the 40 beheaded babies on October 7th. It didn't happen. Apparently there's this IDF military commander who made it all up, and Biden would later say he saw photos of it. No photos of it exist. But again, that sort of lie, the lie of the mass rapes, which is also a lie, on October 7th, they paved the way for the genocide. To this day, as you say, even once those things have been debunked or largely debunked, even if there's an acknowledgement of that, which there has not been yet, there has been pretty much an acknowledgement in the mainstream press that the 40 dead babies wasn't true. The mass rape story still lingers, though I think was it the Times of London, I think I'm correct in that, is one of the first mainstream publications that now has questioned the mass rape story. But so all of these, and of course there was the mass rape claim against Gaddafi in 2011. That ended up being totally debunked, right?